Brendan?
This meeting is being recorded.
Super, vielen Dank. Und ich
Okay,
werde
great.
auch
So I myself will also start the recording so that we can record both audio channels.
Herzlich willkommen noch einmal zum
Okay, so
heutigen
welcome once again to the kitchen table talk. My name is Johanna Frangisch,
und ich werde durch den
and
heutigen Abend
I
führen.
will be your moderator tonight.
Ich arbeite bei
I
Suske
am
Consulting
working at Suske
und
Consulting,
dort das Projekt
and
Farming
there
for
I
Nature.
coordinate the Farming for Nature
Mein
project.
Co-Moderator
My
heute
co-moderator
Abend
tonight
Brendan
is
Dunford.
Brendan Dunford.
Könntest du
Brendan,
bitte auch
could
kurz
you
Hallo zu
please
unseren
say
Teilnehmern sagen?
hello to our participants as well?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the virtual kitchen table talks. I hope you can all hear me. I'm calling in from the west of Ireland in County Clare. And here in Ireland, we've got over 100 amazing Farming for Nature ambassadors, and we're going to hear from one of them tonight shortly. So I look forward to both presentations tonight, and I'll be sharing some of your questions later with our speakers. Thank you.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, lieber Brendan.
Thank you very much, Brendan.
Ich danke dir herzlich, dass du heute dir
I
die
would like
Zeit
to
nimmst,
thank
mit
you
mir
for
dieses spannende
taking the
Gespräch zu
time
moderieren.
to moderate
Farming
this
for Nature
exciting
wurde
kitchen
ja
table
auf
talk.
deine Initiative
Farming
in
for
Irland gestartet
Nature
und ist
was
dort zu
started
einer
upon your
schon sehr
initiative in
großen
Ireland,
und
and in
erfolgreichen
fact,
Bewegung
it
geworden.
has become a very successful movement there in
Und warst es
Ireland.
auch, der an uns in Österreich
It was
herangetreten
you
ist
who
und uns
approached us in
veranlasst hat,
Austria, and
Farming
it
for
was
Nature
you
auch in
who
Österreich
asked us
zu
to
starten.
offer and
Und umso
start
schöner finde
farming
ich
for
es,
nature
dass
in
wir
Austria as
heute zum
well.
ersten
So it
Mal
is all
eine
the
gemeinsame
better, all the
Veranstaltung
nicer
machen
that
können.
we are able to do
Natur-
this
und
event
Klimaschutz
today,
kennt ja keine
tonight, together.
Landesgrenzen
I mean,
und
climate
daher ist so ein
protection does not
internationaler
know any
Austausch
borders.
ganz besonders
Therefore,
wichtig.
international exchange of opinions is
Kurz möchte
very
ich noch zum
important.
Ablauf der
So
Veranstaltung
I would
etwas
just
sagen.
like to say to
Also wir
you
werden jetzt gleich eine
how
ganz kurze
this
Umfrage noch
kitchen
machen unter
table
den
talk will
Teilnehmerinnen,
happen. We will
weil
have a
wir auch
short
wissen
survey
wollen,
among the
wer alles
participants
heute mit
because we
dabei
are
ist.
certainly also interested in
Und
finding out
dann
who is with
starten wir
us
mit den
tonight. And then we
Präsentationen
will
von
start
Andrew
with the
Bergin und
presentations.
Johannes
Andrew
Zauner, unsere
Bergin and
beiden
Johannes
Bauern, die heute
Zauner,
zu Gast
and the
sind.
two farmers
Sie werden
that are
insgesamt
our
circa eine
guests
halbe
today,
Stunde
will
präsentieren.
present
Und
for half an hour
danach
in
seid
total.
ihr
And
als Teilnehmer
afterwards, you
dran,
as
denn ihr
participants
seid
take the
eingeladen,
floor.
eure Fragen
You
und
shall
auch
be the
fachliche
protagonists
Beiträge
because
zum
you will be
Thema
able
zu bringen.
to ask
Dieses
your
Format
questions and deliver your
Online-Küchengespräch,
comments.
das
So this
lebt ganz
format, the
stark
kitchen table
davon,
talk,
dass jeder Teilnehmer sich
depends
aktiv
on
daran
the
beteiligt.
fact that every
Soll so ein
participant
bisschen das Gefühl entstehen,
participates in it.
dass
And
wir
the
gemeinsam
feeling
einem
that we want to
Küchentisch
generate, that we want to create, is
und
that we're
ja,
sat
uns zu
around the
diesem
kitchen
Thema
table
unterhalten. Das
and
ist
that we're
eigentlich so ein
talking
bisschen
about
die
this
Idee
subject.
hinter diesem
So that's
Format.
the
Das heißt, es ist
idea in the
durchaus
back of
erwünscht, dass
our
die Kamera
heads.
eingeschaltet
So
bleibt, damit
really,
wir uns
I
sehen
would
können,
like to say,
sofern es von der
leave the
Internetleistung
camera
geht.
switched on so that we can
Und
see
wir
each
wünschen
other
uns
as
wirklich
long
auch,
as
dass
the
ihr euch
internet
an der
bandwidth
Diskussion
is
beteiligt,
sufficient.
also
And
virtuell
please
die Hand
also
anhebt
do
oder die
participate
Kamera
in the
bietet
discussion. So raise your
und euch
virtual
dann wirklich zu
hand
Wort
or
meldet.
wave into the camera and
Wichtig dabei
then
ist,
demand
dass
to be
ihr das
heard. What is
Mikrofon nur
important is
einschaltet,
that
wenn ich
you
spreche.
should only switch on the
Und wenn ich euch
microphone
aufgerufen
when
habe, dann, damit das
you
mit der Übersetzung
want
gut klappt.
to
Und
speak, and when you
ansonsten
do
wird das
speak, and when I
Mikrofon
have given you the
ausschalten.
sign that you could speak.
Oder eine
Otherwise,
Möglichkeit ist
always
wie
mute the
immer auch
microphone.
Fragen und
It is
Beiträge in den Chat
a
zu
possibility
stellen.
always also to ask your questions
Und
via
vielleicht noch
the
einmal
chat
kurz zu
function.
allen, die
Now,
jetzt
just quickly,
neu
for
dazugekommen
everybody
sind.
who has joined us
Ja,
just
ich kann
recently,
jetzt aber doch nicht erklären, wie das mit den Sprachkanälen geht, weil ich ja natürlich
well,
im
I
deutschen
can't
Kanal jetzt bin.
really explain how it
Man
works
sieht
with the
mich
language
ja auch
channels
dabei.
because I'm in the German channel, but
Gut,
you
aber
can
ich werde
see the
wahrscheinlich jetzt,
instructions
ich
in the
werde nur
channel.
ganz
But
kurz
anyway,
in
I'm
den
just explaining it to you.
allgemeinen
You go to the globe
Kanalprofil
and
nur
you just
zur
switch your
Sicherheit
language, and
für
that's
alle, die
when
es auch
you
nicht schaffen
hear
mit der
your language.
Übersetzung.
Right. So now.
Moment. So, ich versuche jetzt noch einmal ich bin jetzt im Originalkanal. Also
So I'm
alle, die
now in
jetzt
the
neu
original
dazugekommen
channel.
sind,
All of
bitte,
those who came in
es wird
new,
gedolmetscht und das heißt, wenn
I
ihr
would
auf
like to let you
Deutsch
know that there is a
dieses
translation.
Gespräch hören möchtet,
If you want to
müsst ihr
listen to
bitte
the
unten
kitchen
auf die
table talk
Weltkugel
in
klicken
German,
und
then
dort
just click
den
the globe
deutschen Kanal auswählen. Es gibt
and
eine Anlage,
choose
eine
the German channel
im
for the
Chat.
German
Bitte auf
speakers,
den
but
Link klicken,
obviously for
dort
the
steht
English speakers,
genau,
you'd have
wie
to
ihr
click the English
euch in diesen Kanal
language.
einwählen könnt.
Anyway, there's a link and it explains to you how to dial
So
into
everyone
the
who is
into
new
your
or
language
needs,
channel.
if you want to change in the English channel, you need to go to the world, to the little globe, and here you can choose the channel. So, ich gehe wieder in den deutschen Kanal.
So I go into
So,
the
bitte
German
noch
channel
einmal
again.
alle
So
auf
once
Stummschalten,
again,
wenn ihr
please
nicht
everybody
sprecht.
mute yourselves when you
So,
do
jetzt
not speak.
ich starte mit der
All right.
Umfrage an
So I will
unsere
start with the
Teilnehmerinnen.
survey of our
Und
participants
zwar wollen wir ja wissen, wer
because we
alles
want to
hier
know
bei uns
who
ist.
is
Und ich schaue mal, ob
participating
ich das
tonight.
hier starten kann.
I'll just see whether I can start
Ihr
this
müsstet
here.
es jetzt
So you
sehen,
should be able
nämlich
to
die erste
see it,
Frage
and
ist,
it's
aus
bilingual.
welchem Land
So
kommst
the
du?
first question is, which country
Aus
do you come
Österreich,
from? Do you
aus
come from
Irland,
Austria? Do you come from
vielleicht aus
Ireland?
Litauen
Do you come from
oder
Lithuania?
vielleicht aus einem
Or
anderen Land. Und ich
perhaps
sehe
even
schon,
another
dass sich
country? I can
hier
already
die
see
Teilnehmer
that
beteiligen und
the
ich
participants are
sehe das nämlich auf meinem
participating.
Bildschirm,
I can see that
dass
on my
hier
screen.
schon fleißig eingetragen wird.
So I can see
Ja, ich
that
warte
you
jetzt noch
are
5
entering
Sekunden,
your country.
aber
I'm
ich
waiting for
denke,
another
es haben
5
sich die
seconds,
meisten
but I think
eingetragen.
everybody has done
Gut, dann werde
that
ich das jetzt
already.
veröffentlichen und
So I'll
das
publish
müsstet ihr jetzt
that,
auch sehen. Also man
and you should
sieht,
be able to see that.
die meisten Teilnehmer sind aus Österreich
So most
mit
participants are from
60%,
Austria,
20% aus
60%. Then
Irland,
we have
das ist schön.
20%
Und wir haben
of
auch einige
participants from
Teilnehmerinnen
Ireland.
aus
We even
Litauen
have some
und auch
participants
aus
from
anderen
Lithuania
Ländern.
and even
Ich
from
vermute
other
mal, dass
countries as
aus
well.
Deutschland,
I
was ich so von
assume
der
that
Anmeldung
they
gesehen habe.
might be coming from Germany because there were
Jetzt
some
habe ich
registrations
noch
from Germany.
eine
Now,
zweite Umfrage, und
I
zwar,
have a second survey,
welchen Beruf
and the question
ihr
here
habt.
is, what is your
Also seid ihr
profession?
eher Bauer oder Bäuerin
Are you a farmer?
oder seid ihr vielleicht
Or
Ökologe
are
oder
you an
Biologin
ecologist or
oder würdet ihr
biologist?
sagen, ihr habt einen anderen
Or
Beruf?
would you say that we are,
Und es
or
geht
you are
auch,
something
dass ihr hier
else?
mehrere Punkte auswählt,
You
weil
can
man kann ja auch
also
mehr als einen
choose
Beruf haben.
several options because you can have more than
Und es wird schon
one
fleißig
profession.
abgestimmt. Jetzt warte ich nur mehr ganz
Now
kurz.
I'm just waiting.
Und ich glaube, das war es jetzt so, der Großteil
Well,
der
I think that was
Teilnehmer
it. Most participants
hat
have
abgestimmt
answered the
und ich gebe
question,
euch das jetzt frei.
and
Also wir sehen
this
natürlich,
is the
die
result.
meisten
So
Bauern
we
und
can
Bäuerinnen
see
und
that
das freut
most
uns
of
sehr, denn
you
das ist ja
are
genau
farmers,
unsere
and this
Zielgruppe.
is
In Farming for
very
Nature wollen wir
positive for
ja
us because you are our target group. As Farming for
innovative Bauern und
Nature,
Bäuerinnen
we
zeigen,
want
die
to
eben
show
zeigen, dass
innovative
Naturschutz und
farmers
erfolgreicher Landwirtschaft
who
Hand in Hand gehen kann.
can
Und das
show
freut uns umso
that
mehr, dass heute so viele Bauern und
nature
Bäuerinnen da
can
sind.
go hand in glove with successful farming.
Gut, vielen herzlichen Dank, dass Sie an
So
dieser
thank you very
Umfrage
much
teilgenommen
for your
haben.
participation in this survey.
Und ich darf jetzt tatsächlich ins Thema
And
kommen.
now
Wir
I
haben ja
start
heute
with
am Abend
the
dieses Thema
topic
pflugloser
itself.
Ackerbau.
So
Und
no-till
ich freue mich
farming
sehr,
is
dass
the
ich da
subject
wirklich
of
zwei
tonight,
unglaublich spannende
and
Bauern
we
dazu
have
begrüßen darf.
two
Beide
wonderful
sind im
farmers
Farming for
here with
Nature
us.
Netzwerk
Both
dabei
are participants
und
in the
sind
Farming for
Vorreiter im
Nature
Bereich
network, and they are
pflugloser Ackerbau.
pioneers
Sie
in
sind in dieser Rolle
no-till
auch als
farming.
Vermittler
And
sehr
this,
aktiv.
in this role, they are
Den
also
Anfang macht Andrew
acting
Bergin.
as ambassadors. Andrew Bergin, you are the first speaker, so please start sharing your screen and your slides while I introduce you. Andrew Bergin is Biodiversity Ambassador in Farming for Nature, and he is cultivating in County Kildare. So he no-tills 130 hectares, and the focus of his efforts is soil protection, but he does many other measures as well that also support biodiversity. Thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing your experiences with us. I would like to ask you to start with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Johanna. Good evening. My name's Andrew Bergin. As you've heard, I'm an ambassador for Farming for Nature in Ireland, and I'm delighted to be here with you all. So, I farm in the southeast of Ireland, about 1 hour from Dublin. I grow crops here on very level land, as you can see. It's a limestone-based soil, and it has plenty of stones. The soil is a fine silty loam with about 4% organic matter. It's a free draining soil in an area with relatively low rainfall, and there's a tradition of crop production here. Most of this farm has had no grass for 100 years or more. It's fertile and easily worked, but it does need careful management. pH levels are from 7.5 to more than 8, and the calcium base saturation is over 90%. The soil has made a lot of progress since I stopped cultivating and started minding it. So the crumb structure, for instance, and the color that you see here in this picture were not typical a few years ago. So what changed and why? I started farming in the mid-1980s, and by around 2000, my yields and quality were slipping, especially in dry years. I was using a conventional system of ploughing and sowing with light cultivation, and I'd started to see year-old stubble being ploughed up that was still bright yellow, the same color it was when it went down. Conventional agriculture had nothing to say about this phenomenon or really about anything else to do with soil life. And I was disturbed that there seemed to be absolutely no life in my soil, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. In 2013, I trialed a direct drill as a means of reducing machinery and labour, and it achieved that very well. But what immediately struck me was the healthier, more even crops and the change in the feeling of the soil under my feet. Over the following 2 years, I changed fully to direct drilling and then started to pay a lot more attention to the soil. The spade became a very important tool. So I needed to look at the soil to try to understand what was happening and to see what I could do to help. Incidentally, I also had to become much more patient. Now, my neighbours often sow crops a week before I'm able to, and every farmer knows how hard it is to watch your neighbour working when you cannot. But I know that my crops will catch up. At the same time, the habits of a lifetime are hard to break. At the same time that I was moving to direct drilling, cover crops were starting to get support from an agri-environmental scheme, and it was obvious to me that they worked well with direct drilling. I quickly learnt that without a cover crop, the high silt content in my soil allowed an impermeable cap to form on the surface, and it was sometimes necessary to cultivate to break this and allow the soil to breathe before I could sow. That doesn't happen very much now, and I cultivate as little as possible, but it is really important in any system to know when you need to compromise. As well as soil armour to protect the soil from weather, the cover crops also capture nutrients that might otherwise be lost. And some species, like the buckwheat seen flowering in this slide, can help solubilize nutrients that would otherwise be bound in the soil and not available to plants. Most of the soil biology depends on root exudates as a source of carbon, and it will only survive for a few weeks without a living plant. Building soil biology is a painfully slow process, and I can't afford to lose what I have. The whole environment benefits from cover crops as an alternative to bare soil. Autumn flowering cover crops provide food for pollinators when flowers are scarce. They support a whole range of insects above and below the ground, including some that I wouldn't normally welcome. For instance, I never really had slugs until I started to grow covers, and I was horrified by the numbers of slug eggs I saw in early years. But the big numbers of slugs very rarely appeared, and I think that a certain amount of slugs and eggs to support a population of beetles that feed on them are needed. Nature can maintain a healthy balance if I just get out of her way. And some of the predators are pretty spectacular. I have not used an insecticide for about 10 years, and I'm quite happy that I have less insect damage than I would have if I was using them. I think that the spider we see here is eating a wasp, and I think that wasp might have been laying eggs in the bodies of aphids that would otherwise damage my crops. But I wasn't going to start an argument with this spider. Most of the fields here have 3 or 4 meter wide margins around the edges. Some of these were initially supported by an agri-environmental scheme, and they were left there when the payments finished. A whole range of flowers has moved into the margins by itself. The ones that surprised and excited me most were 2 kinds of orchids that were first seen here a few years ago, and they're now spreading rapidly around the farm. This is not something I ever expected to see here. This variety of plants supports a whole range of weird and wonderful life. All of these insects and the shelter of the plants have brought back birds such as the skylark, which had been missing for decades and are now seen here in their hundreds. Lapwing have nested here, and snipe and woodcock have appeared for the first time. Undisturbed ground leaves crop residues available as feed, and the yellowhammer are common here now, along with fieldfare and redwing in winter. Hedges are now very rarely cut, and they provide masses of flowers and fruit, as well as shelter for both the wildlife and the crops. It's really surprising how hedges settle down when they're left alone. Mine have grown by no more than 1 meter each side, and the briars seem to grow out even less where there's a grass margin alongside. I have planted thousands of trees in small groups in awkward areas around the farm, mostly because I like them and I think there are not enough of them in the area. I gave very serious thought to alley cropping agroforestry in a few fields, but ultimately did a less radical boundary plantation with 1,200 fruit and nut trees. This included a selection of pines, which may eventually produce edible nuts if Ireland keeps warming up. The fruit and nut plantations were funded by a European Innovation Partnership scheme run by Trees on the Land, and their support and advice have been a huge benefit. I'm lucky to have participated in 2 other European Innovation Partnership schemes. The Protecting Farmland Pollinators EIP was a 5-year project run on 40 farms to devise a simple scoring system to rank pollinator friendliness on a variety of farms. The score sheet produced by this scheme is now available to be used as the backbone of a results-based pollinator scheme for all farm enterprises. The first EIP that I got involved in took up a good part of my first 5 years of regenerative agriculture. The Danu project set out to look at how farms can transition from conventional to biological farming. In it, 12 farms applied a range of treatments and approaches following very intensive testing and under the supervision of a small team of dedicated experts. It was a privilege to work with these people, and it certainly speeded up my progress and helped me avoid quite a few mistakes. BASE Ireland is the organisation that has really propelled my development in regenerative farming. Its motto is farmers educating farmers, and it's a vibrant, supportive and contrary group of farmers, all trying to farm in a better way. Farming for Nature, our host tonight, is another extraordinary community run by a small dedicated team, and it has just launched the Farming for Nature Handbook. This is a beautiful book with a wealth of advice and information for anybody involved or interested in having more nature in farming, and it's available all over Europe right now. All of this is the background to a productive arable farm. I grow barley for malt for the brewing and distilling industries. Wheat is grown, some for bread, but mostly for animal feed, and peas are growing for canning for human consumption. Oats are grown for breakfast cereals and for animal feed. Beans are also grown for animal feed, and oilseed rape for oil production and also feed. Whenever possible, I save my own seed on the farm. If necessary, it's cleaned before sowing, and if time allows, I use a biological seed dressing. In the early days, I applied a liquid biological and nutrient mix when direct drilling, but I wasn't happy with the amount of time that I was losing on busy sowing days. I don't use the liquid applicator anymore, but I would like to use more seed dressings. Again, my problem is that they need to be applied to the seed very close to sowing time. But as soon as the ground is ready, all I want to do is sow in case the weather changes, and it changes quite a lot in Ireland. I have attached a set of cutting discs at the front of my tine drill, and this allows me to cut through crop residues and cover crops. They work fairly well, but this picture shows a cover crop that was just too much for them. It had mustard that was flowering and linseed, both of which are very wiry, and they dragged into lumps, choking the drill. That field really needed to be topped before sowing, but by the time I realized it, there was rain approaching, so I stayed sowing, and it wasn't pretty, but it turned out a good crop despite that. I have tried rolling covers during hard frost to terminate them, but I'm not happy with the results. The crops are damaged, but they're not killed, and they still need to be sprayed off before sowing. And in the meantime, I've lost the cover for the soil and most of the living roots. While we are talking about sowing, this picture shows spider webs across a field while it was being drilled. I'd stopped to check the drill and caught this scene in the setting sun, and they were literally covering the ground as fast as I was sowing it. I still use some pesticides, but much less than previously. I find that my healthier crops need less medicine, and I make a better margin while doing less damage. Phosphorus, potash, and minor elements are largely supplied by animal manures, mostly chicken litter. Those manures also supply some nitrogen, but most of what I use is synthetic. All of this is now applied as liquid to the soil when the plants are very small, and later as a foliar feed. In this picture, we're melting urea for foliar feed using a tone fert sprayer and transferring it into tanks for storage. Foliar feeds need to be carefully formulated and pH precisely adjusted. But this is within the ability of farmers, and it allows for very precise and economical crop nutrition. My nitrogen use has been reduced by about 40% without any reduction in crop yields. And crop yields are what keeps the farm going. I can't go green if I end up in the red. This system, producing good yields and quality with lower costs, leaves me with a better margin than before, particularly in years with difficult weather. So direct drilling involves much more than changing your drill. The whole system has to adapt. But it opens up lots of new opportunities. For me, it's a far more interesting and satisfying way to farm. Thank you very much.
Vielen lieben Dank. Vielen
Thank
herzlichen
you.
Dank.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you for this very inspiring presentation, and thank you for sharing your work with us. Thank you for these amazing images, photos, and also for your experience that you shared with us. We are now continuing with the presentation by Johannes Zauner, but let me assure you, you will have plenty of time for questions after the two presentations. So please, to all the participants, please make use of this possibility, collect your questions and write them down so that you can ask them afterwards. All your questions you would have for Johannes Zauner and for Andrew Bergin, please either write your questions into the chat box. You can do that in English and in German. No matter what language you speak, we will be able to give you an answer. And if you don't want to write it into the chat, you can also raise your hand after Johannes's presentation and ask, but then you have to switch on your microphone. Johannes, I would like to welcome you most warmly. You are one of 25 Austrian farmers who were nominated as ambassadors for, and you were represented in Farming for Nature Austria, and you work on your farm according to the principle of conservation farming, and you are going to tell us more about that. Johannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you, Andrew. Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, basically. I mean, there's not really that much to be added to what Andrew has already said. I mean, I think that it is absolutely brilliant to see Andrew again in this way on the internet. Last year, we got to know each other through Base Ireland because he and the boys from Ireland came.
Sorry, I have to interrupt, Johannes. Johannes, du musst in den deutschen Kanal, weil wir hören dich im Deutschen nämlich nicht, wenn du im Original sprichst. Also
well, this was only Johanna saying to Johannes to talk into the German channel.
Also Johannes Zauner wechselt jetzt noch in den richtigen
So Johannes Zauner will be changed into the right language channel, and once he's ready, then we can continue. Okay, thank you. So can you hear me now? Right, okay, great. Okay, so thank you, Andrew, once again for this super presentation. You took the words right out of my mouth about direct drilling and so on. I think it is also great to see you again, because Base Ireland is a partner organization, and him and the boys from Ireland came to our farm to visit, and it is really very good to see you again. So they were here on the field trip. Anyway, it was FAO that defined direct drilling, and 1 million hectares a year is added to the direct drilling scheme. And we also practice this. So our company is in Umbach. For those who don't know it, well, it's located in Lower Austria. It is approximately 60 kilometers to the west of Vienna along the Western Motorway. On the photograph on the left, you can see one of our farmed areas. We are just above Losdorf, which is near to us. So where you see the fog, that's where the motorway is, and this is basically the main connection, the main route between Vienna and Linz. Anyway, our soil is relatively shallow, only 40 to 50 centimeters is topsoil. Then there's kind of granite and rock. And well, we have a soil quality of 16 to 60. So it's actually quite poor. Like I said, we have Lubisol on granite and sandy clay and loamy clay. As far as the precipitation is concerned, 780 to 800 millimeters is not so bad, but it is badly distributed because we have long dry periods, then we have periods with permanent rain, and well, because of the inclination, you can see on the left that there are many steep hills. Because of that, we have problems with water-based erosion, and on top of it, we have high magnesium saturation. We have up to 23% magnesium in the cation exchanger. So yeah, that is a challenge also. And it's shallow. Basically, this all of this led us to do direct drilling. So how did it all start? Where was it all? What was the starting point? Well, this is a photograph that was taken 26, maybe 27 years ago in our enterprise. My father had the possibility of trying out a rented US machine, a direct drilling machine, and well, anyway, he tried this no-till farming for wheat, and the neighbors said, well, this is bound to fail, he's bound to shipwreck. But no, it was actually a very good harvest, and I myself even knew what direct drilling is. It is often not so easy to define, because if I don't do pre-harrowing, sometimes they just also say, well, this is now tilling, but it isn't, strictly speaking. Anyway, for 11 years for maize, we have practiced direct drilling. This is a photograph that was taken 10 years ago. There was also cover crop here. We've had very good success with this and just continued with it. Anyway, switching to conservation agriculture was due to the fact that we kind of dared to ultimately invest in our own machines. So these here you can see how the area is quite strongly inclined, an incline of over 20%. Anyway, so farms that try to implement that have use three principles. These three principles are minimum soil disturbance, permanent soil cover, and maximum biodiversity as far as plants are concerned. Of course, as Andrew said, you have to compromise sometimes, but you know, that's the basic principles. And anyway, soil disturbance is always reduced to a minimum, also for the cover crop. So we have cereals that, well, we do crop rotation, so we have cereals for making flour for the mill and also rye. Then we have grain maize, and this is now bought by my thresher and used for feed, and then there's soybean, which is produced into food stuff. So anyway, we have 32 hectares. That limits us a little bit. We cannot do a broad-based fruit rotation. So when we go from soy to cereals, we have a double cover crop, and between wheat and rye and grain and maize also we have a cover crop. If we have at least 6 weeks, then we do use a cover crop, but also sometimes we do sunflowers and alfalfa and clover grass as a cover crop. And basically we keep the soil alive. The cover crop helps us to do that, obviously. So we do direct drilling. You can see it here. On the left, you see crimping of soybeans. And this is herbicide-free cultivation of soybean as much as possible. So the area is growing every year the area that we do not treat with herbicide. And on the right-hand side, you can see winter cereals that is also done without pesticide, simply because the thick mat of cover crop protects the soil so well, so that almost I have no weed at all. And therefore, we don't need pesticides. So for 6 years, we haven't been using, for 8 years, I correct myself. So for 8 years, we haven't been using pesticides and fungicides. Also, we haven't used them for many years. I mean, it's except, like if you catch a severe bout of cold and you go to the doctor and he gives you an antibiotic, but usually we don't use it. And also the spiders, Andrew showed you the spider webs, and here also we have spiders settling. It's wonderful. They are predators and they keep a lot of pests out. So in the middle, we can see grain and maize, on the left soybean, and then on the right we have a cover crop with lots of things. And one of them is alfalfa, for example. So plant diversity is used for summer cover crop. We have 10 to 15 mixed partners, and 4 to 5 in the autumn. Soy and maize, 2 to 3 mixed partners on the right. This is a photograph for the future. It's rapeseed with companion seed, but it's not all roses, because every system that has advantages also has disadvantages. These are photographs that show to you how we try to solve problems. For instance, if you have accumulated water or waterlogs, then it can be a problem. And also the sowing technique is sometimes decisive to make sure that the weed stays out. Sometimes there are kind of gaps in the cover crop, and that's where the weed gets in. Anyway, so the job of farmer is to feed the soil. That is certainly true. It's a truism. Now, a couple of photographs that show to you how we cultivate. Andrew said a lot about the advantages. I can only confirm what he said. So here we have a photograph. Here we have ultimately changed over. This is planting green. This is an example of planting green. This has the best effects for direct drilling of maize and soybean, because in our case, in May, when we cultivate or plant the crops, we have a problem with excessive moisture. The water is then accumulated without releasing it, and the cover crop nevertheless uses it up, and it makes the soil drier. And this is the sowing machine that we use, the direct drill. It has several upgrades. We have weights on the sowing units. We have germinator wheels also that press it in. We also have a cutting disc for the seed dressing.
quasi also Nährstoffe in den Seeschlitz zu spritzen oder Dünger, haben wir quasi eine
which is to
Seeschlitzdüngung auch noch eine
so we have a sowing slit fertilization which injects nutrients, and this is the freezing over of the cover crop. This is a photograph of 24th with planting green maize. There's rye, pea, and broad bean. It is a mix of everything. It's called messy farming sometimes, but I don't like it because I'm a messy person. Anyway, so you can see that many plants have superb conditions. This is a wonderful comparison. On the left, the exact left is mulch seeding. On the right, you have direct drilling. Where you had tillage, there was a carpet of wheat because of the mineralization. I don't know why, but in the direct drilling plot next to it, there was virtually no wheat because the mulch layer covered it up. So that stayed until the harvest. This was 2 days before the harvest. The cobs developed very well. This was one of my poorest areas, but it brought me one of the highest yields, and never ever have I had a comparable yield on this yield. And especially this was a dry year with 30 feet days. So this is the cover crop. This is what it looks like. You see that it develops quite well. We need double cover crops. We have a winter mix of 3 to 5 components in October that we put into the cover crop in order to have the planting green effect to suppress weeds. And then the winter resistant crops are then to be taken wheat killer free to sweet corn, to corn. This is where wheat has been planted in soybean straw, and what you can see in between is the cover crop that was there, that was in there before. So when we drilled soy into rye, and the rye was nevertheless there as a protecting layer. Here we also have the winter barley, and this is what the planting green looks like. So maize, then freezing over of the cover crop. We don't use the herbicide, and then in the spring you have a very good development, and then you have a very satisfactory harvest. There are of course many setbacks as well, but at least you know that you're on a good way. Soybean is similar. Soybean, we have been direct drilling for the 4th year this year, and well, the plants are developing very well, and the yield has not suffered compared to conventional agriculture. In other crops, you can have a minus of up to 10%, but over the years it evens out. Now, about our farm, we want these biodiversity strips that Andrew showed. So we have these strips. Some of them we do ourselves. They're between 4 and 2 years old, and we are certainly also trying to not, well, to rewild the surfaces, because the nature is to tell us what grows there. I don't want to sow into that every 2 years. Well, anyway, other than that, please feel free to ask your questions now, and thank you for having invited me.
Thank you very much, Johannes. That was a fascinating presentation, 2 fascinating presentations. So for everybody who's listening, and we have a really good group here tonight, lots of people, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box now, or raise your hand and we will invite you to ask the question directly. But I'd like to compliment, first of all, both speakers. Very interesting and very inspiring presentations. Lots of color, lots of very unusual machinery, and lots of very healthy crops also, which is really interesting. Um, I think what I really found interesting about both presentations, and maybe to look at some of the commonalities, I think the fact that there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of trial and error, there's a lot of adaptation, there's a lot of learning. There's always a kind of strive to achieve a balance between different needs and different compromises between nature and farming. But I think that you've both achieved it very successfully. If I might ask a question myself of our speakers, first of all, Andrew, um, if you can hear me and respond, one interesting concept that Johannes presented tonight was this planting green. So, Andrew, in Ireland, is this a widely known concept and widely practiced concept? Maybe you could respond to that.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. It is widely practiced, and when it's done successfully, it can get rid of herbicides or vastly reduce them, which is an enormous benefit, and it maintains that soil armor for the entire time too. So, uh, in contrast, my system involves a little more disturbance because it's using a fixed tine that basically scratches a track in the soil and drops the seed in there instead of the disc type system that Johanna's using. It literally just slices a disc and a slot and drops the seed in there. Both systems have their pros and cons. I've stuck so far with the tine one because the danger with the disc is that if conditions are not dry enough, it can clog up with soil. It can smear the side of the cut that it's making, and water can get trapped in there. Slugs can sometimes get trapped up in there, and it's just a slug highway where they go up and down eating all your seed. So it's ideally I'd have both types of drill, and then I'd use whichever one was suitable on the day. And I am considering that what I may need to do is look at sometimes hiring in a disc drill to get around situations that don't suit my tine drill.
Okay. I could also maybe ask you, Andrew, while you're on speaking, somebody put a question in earlier, just to explain the technology of direct drilling in more detail. So some people will be very familiar with it, but for maybe those who aren't, would you mind offering a very simple explanation around the technology of direct drilling?
Okay, yeah. Well, it's a conventional the conventional system that I briefly described that I practiced before involved plowing the soil, which is complete inversion of the soil. So you take the pit that's on top and put it down at the bottom and bring fresh soil up to the top. That soil is then cultivated to make it fine enough for a seed bed, and seed is put into it. In contrast, the direct drilling aims to minimize the soil disturbance just enough for you to get your seed into the ground, and covered up again. And as I explained, my original motive was really a selfish one. I wanted less machines and less work, and it does provide that. But when you reduce the disturbance on the soil, you reduce the disturbance on all the life that's in the soil. And if you're continually disturbing it, as I found to my cost, eventually there isn't very much life in the soil. But if you can leave it alone, that biology, and some of it's, your worms, you'll see more worms, but there's an awful lot of stuff that's invisible. It's at a microscopic level, but it's there. And for me, the evidence that it's there is really the larger things that I see, the beetles, the birds, for instance. Like the birds I consider, it doesn't directly pay me to have birds, but I'm delighted to see them because it means there's something there for them. And if there's something there for them, there's a system, there's something going on. So, it's remarkable, really, and it's taken a complete change in my whole farming philosophy because I now want as many things to happen without my interference as possible because I see them as almost always beneficial. You know, some of them in the short term might puzzle me and cause me a slight problem. And you know, pests seem to come and go in their own cycles, and the same applies to some extent to weeds. But and sometimes I do need to go in and interfere with them so that I can produce a saleable crop. But a lot of the time, it's actually that the less you do, the better, and that's really the principle behind direct drilling.
Excellent, Andrew. Thank you. And just maybe one more question before I come back to Johannes. I was very impressed with your spider photograph, by the way. That's a very under-researched group of invertebrates, the spiders. But the question I wanted to ask was, I thought you made some very good points about, patience, trying to find a balance, the need to compromise occasionally. But also what I found was very interesting was that you make one change and it necessitates another change and you have to, so it almost is an entire systems change. It's not just one simple thing, it leads to many changes. So on that journey of change, have you arrived at a point where you are happy or are there further changes and adaptations that you aim to introduce to your farm?
There's no end to this, Brendan. No, it is a dynamic system, and the more I think about this, the more I realize it's like that. There's no. Actually, I was really bored farming before this. I started into this because there really wasn't any change. It was pretty much doing the same thing year in, year out. Whereas this is a very dynamic system. It's constantly changing, and I have to change and adapt and learn with it. So it's constantly challenging, but it's also very, very fulfilling. But definitely if I'm not going forward, I'm going backwards because there's nowhere to stand still. It's like being out at sea. If you stand still, you'll just sink.
Very good. Excellent. And that excitement of learning is an important, I think, value and benefit from what you do. One small other question, Andrew, briefly. What was the biggest hurdle? This is from Will. What was the biggest hurdle to get over when transforming to no-till? And what was the easiest or best fix for a major problem you have found on your journey? So what was the biggest hurdle? And what is there any kind of interesting hack that you can offer us? Interesting solution.
Well, I'd say the biggest hurdle initially actually was probably a lack of information and knowledge. Now the groups I've been involved in that I described since, and particularly BASE, which Will is also a very active member of, have been terrific. And I think without the support of those groups, also I think without the internet, without the access to information that we have now, uncensored information, we don't depend on the normal channels because the conventional channels gave me no solutions to my problems. All I could do was just keep getting worse, and that's what was happening. So information probably was, and it is less so now, although I guess the more of it is, the more discriminating you have to be about it. But again, a good group of peers like BASE will help you to sift the good stuff from the bad stuff.
Okay, and the second part of the question from Will, I think it's a good one. What was the easiest or best fix for a major problem that you encountered on your journey?
Easiest or best fix for yeah. Well, this mightn't be directly answering what Will says, but to be honest, I have so much less stuff around the farm now. I've way less machines than I had. I've one tractor, one drill. It's simple. It's simple machinery. So I spend a lot more time actually thinking and talking about what I'm going to do than I do doing it, which suits my disposition very well. I'd say that's probably a good fix.
Okay, we'll leave it at that and we'll turn to Johannes for a few questions. Thank you very much, Andrew. I think Johanna will be back to you with some questions in a moment. But Johannes, I might begin with you. Thank you for your superb presentation also. And we have a question from Lithuania for you, from Justas. So, question for Johannes. What, Johannes, is the success story of you using the roller crimper? Is it the environment that you are farming in, the dates you start roller crimping, or other things? I know many farmers who tried roller crimping but were unhappy because the cover crops pop up back. What advice would you give to these farmers? So, Johannes, would you like to attempt to answer that question, please? Here, yep.
Also nach den Erfolgen suche ich immer noch
I am
selber.
still looking for success myself, or to the secret for success,
Ja,
or
also es gab auf
ways
jeden
of
Fall
making it
Erfolge.
successful. Well, there was some success,
Wir hatten eben die Zeit, wo
definitely.
ich bei Sojabohne gezeigt habe, haben wir
I showed the
die letzten 2
soybean,
Jahre auch
and
einen Teil
in the
unserer
past 2
Fläche
years, some
ohne,
of my
ohne
land
vorher die Zwischenfrucht mit der Spritze quasi abzutöten auf diesen Parzellen, konnten wir das durchziehen.
was used
Und
for
so den
this
Soja
method
quasi
without
ohne Herbizid und ohne Bodenbearbeitung
without
bis zur Ernte
herbicides
führen.
and without tilling.
Aber
So we brought soy
der,
to the harvest
ich glaube,
without
das
herbicides
nach
and
gezielten
tilling,
Einsatz
without
oder wie es am
spraying.
besten funktioniert,
But
suchen wir selber
we are
mitunter.
still
Also wir haben
looking
jetzt
for
seit
the perfect
2
solution.
Jahren
So
oder
for
2,5 Jahren
2
diesen
years
Roller Crimper
and
im
2.5
Einsatz.
years,
Die
we are
Vorteile sind
using this
definitiv, weil
roller
man eben durch
crimper.
diese,
The
durch dieses
benefits are
Quetschen und nicht Schneiden der
definitely that we
Zwischenfrucht
do not cut the cover crop,
abtöten kann, wenn sie
uh,
blüht. Das
and
ist sehr
we
wichtig.
can still kill it when it
Aber
flowers
aufgrund
by
seiner
squeezing it, by
Arbeitsbreite
crimping it.
und
Um,
dem Gewicht,
and this
beziehungsweise
is
auch
quite successful.
dem
And
Investment,
also
dem,
the
also
weight of the
Investment in
machine.
größere
And
fachkräftige
we don't
Arbeitsbreiten auf
have,
unserem Betrieb,
we cannot invest in others in, in
halt ein
another
Arbeitsgang
system.
ist, der dann sehr
So
viel Zeit
it
nach der
is
Saat noch
a
erfordert und auch die
part of work that
Bedingungen erfordert.
requires a lot of
Wenn man sich
time.
damit mehr auseinandersetzen
If
will, dann gibt
you
es ein
want
Buch, ich
to
glaube, das
look
irgendwo liegt,
into
ich finde es
that
jetzt
in
nicht.
more details,
Das
into
heißt,
using roller crimpers,
das heißt einfach
there is a book.
Organic No-Till.
I think
Das
it's
ist ein
called, yeah,
Buch
it's called
vom
Organic
Rodale
No-Till.
Institute,
It's
also
published by
von
the
denen, die
Rodale
quasi diesen Roller Crimper in den
Institute. So
USA auf
this
dem
is the
Biobetrieb
company
erfunden haben.
that
Und das
invented
ist
the roller
normalerweise, also ich habe es gerade
crimper
von
in the
Amazon,
United States. I think I
ist ein
ordered
Buch,
it on
wo eben, das
Amazon.
ist auf Englisch, das gibt es leider
It's
nicht als
written in
deutsche
English.
Version, also nur im
Unfortunately, it
Englischen
has not
erhältlich,
been
aber ist sehr
translated
einfach
into
geschrieben
German,
in
but
Englisch.
it's very simple
Und
English actually. And
in dem Buch steht eigentlich alles drin, was man zum Roller Crimpen wissen muss.
this book tells
Wenn
you
man ihn
everything about roller
quasi
crimping that you
biologisch oder
need to
ohne
know
Herbizid
about
mit dem
roller
Roller Crimper
crimping.
eine Kultur etablieren möchte.
So
Ich muss aber
if
auch
you
dazu
want
sagen,
to
wir
establish a
setzen den nur bei
culture,
Frühjahrskulturen ein, also
oh,
vor
by the way,
Mais
I
oder
have
bei
to
der
say we only use it for
Maisaussaat und
spring
beim
culture before
Sojaanbau,
we sow
weil
maize
die
and when we
Herbstzwischenfrüchte
sow
sowieso, also die wir im Sommer
soy,
anbauen, sowieso abfrieren im
because
Herbst und da würde es keinen
the
Sinn machen. Da
plants that we
fahren wir
sow in
maximal
autumn freeze
nach
over in
dem
winter
Anbau der
anyway, and it
winterharten
wouldn't
Komponenten für
make
diese doppelte
sense.
Zwischenfrucht noch einmal mit einer
And
weiteren Cambridge
then
Walze oder so
we
drüber,
just use
weil
a
der Roller
standard
Crimper hier
Cambridge
keinen Sinn ergibt, weil
Cambridge
man den nur gezielt
roller
zum
for
Abtöten
that,
der
because the
Zwischenfrucht
roller
nutzt
crimper
und
is actually only used
diese ja
for
sowieso
killing the cover crop,
aufgrund des Frosts im Winter
and in
einfrieren.
winter they will die off anyway because of the cold
Ich
temperatures
hoffe,
and
dass wir das
freezing.
halbwegs beantworten können.
Danke. Brandon,
If
Thank
you'll
you
allow
very
me,
much.
Johanna, I have 2 short questions to finish for Johannes. Okay, so Johannes, and these are questions from me because I was very interested in your presentation. When I visited Austria last year with Andrew and some people from Ireland and Lithuania, it was recently after the floods. You had some major floods, I think, in around Vienna last year, and soil loss was a big issue. Given the nature of the landscape, you said it was quite hilly and also some light soils in places. Have you given consideration to planting trees to stabilize soil and protect them from erosion?
Also ja, ich habe überlegt, den Böden, also Agroforst,
Yes, I did try to integrate agroforest, but we have a problem because of our area structure. We are very limited because if the surfaces are between 0.8 and 1.5 hectares, and then I put in a row of trees, then there's not really that much place for market crops if I try to do, like cultivate plants. But in areas where we have almost no trees because the landscape has been tidied up, Andrew saw that there were areas where there are no trees at all between bare areas, and we tried to put in windbreaks, like trees and shrubbery, but it takes some time until we get there. But yes, it is something that we have certainly considered, but the erosion itself is not an issue on my farm. Since I practice no tillage, we have inclinations of up to 20%. Since we have started practicing no tillage, we have no erosion whatsoever.
Excellent. Last question from me, and then I'll go back to Johanna. So the way you practice your farming is obviously very good for soil health, and there are benefits in terms of reduced input costs. Is it possible for you as a farmer to benefit financially from the market for the practices that you undertake?
Also ich hoffe, ich habe das jetzt richtig interpretiert. Seit wir auf No-Tillage oder
since
Conservation
we
Agriculture
have
umgestellt haben,
switched over to no tillage or
den Dieselverbrauch auf
conservation
1,4 bis 2
agriculture,
Drittel
the
senken können.
diesel
Das sind alleine Kosten
consumption has been decreased by 2/3. These are costs that I don't need to invest to get to a positive level as far as the economy is concerned, and simply every year
einfach das Ganze, obwohl der Betrieb
I
eigentlich relativ klein
see
ist, lukrativer läuft,
that everything is more
weil
lucrative because I simply it's more profitable because the break even for yield is lower. If I have a year that is not so good, then I'm still better off than a traditional agriculture enterprise because I have had less input costs. So it also improves year in, year out.
But you're not rewarded by the market for your work for the Oz ecosystem service. Okay, thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much, both of you. That was fascinating. And
Nein, also
no.
Nein, das gibt es bei uns aktuell noch nicht. Also
no, there isn't. I mean, the French, they have such a CA label. I think ICAF actually communicated that to me, but we don't have that in Austria. It is only through ÖPOL, through our eco program, with direct payments from the state, that we get money for summer crops that were farmed in direct drilling. I get 85 euros per hectare for direct drilling agriculture and for cover crop as well. It depends on which variant you choose. You get money per hectare if you have a more intensive cover crop mix. But more money, no. Basically, we are working on establishing a label in the medium or long term, but it's a lot of work involved, and we need people who know more about business and the economy than me.
Thank you, Johannes.
Dann übernehme ich wieder
Well, in that
die
case, I take over again.
Da sind ja einige Fragen gekommen
So
noch im
some
Chat,
questions
auch
did come
dich,
in the
Johannes,
chat,
dann
also
aber
to
auch
you,
in
Johannes,
weiterer Folge
but
an den
also
Andrew. Aber
to
ich gebe jetzt
Andrew.
an dich, Johannes,
But
ein paar
I'll
Fragen aus
ask
dem Chat,
you
nämlich
a
die
few
Agnes
questions,
Fuchs hat
Johannes.
gefragt,
Agnes
zu diesem
Fuchs
Bild von dem
asks
Mais, das du
about
gezeigt hast, wo wir
this
hohe Erträge
fungus,
hatten, und sie wollte da eine genaue
where there was
Zahl
a high
wissen. Magst du
yield.
das
She
auch
wanted to
nennen,
know
wie
a
hoch
figure.
der
Do you
Ertrag
want to say
tatsächlich war?
how much the yield was? Well, yield counts for nothing if you don't consider the costs, because it's all about the contribution margin. But the yield was 11 tons of maize, and in mulch sowing, I only had that in a very good year, if at all. So it was 9 to 10 tons mostly, because it is a very poor site, really. And in a year with more than 30 heat days and without rain in the summer and lots of rain in the autumn, well, taking all of that into account, it was a huge success. At this site, we have had to do tilling because of badly developed cover crop. Mulch sowing was on a better area, and that was 1.5 tons less. So really, this only went to confirm my suspicion, and it completely confirmed me in my working method. Yes, so it's comparing it to other plots that were not direct drilled, and you saw that direct drilling was an advantage. Then Eva asked whether you only do direct drilling if you don't till at all. Well, my last tilling on 90 to 95% on my surface, on my area, was 2021. But now I do no tilling everywhere, unless there is something that Andrew said where something goes wrong, and then you might have to intervene. But that intervention is only to flatten it out, and it doesn't go beyond 2 inches. And that is very rare. I also have to add that this only works if you switch over in your mind, first of all. That's the most important switch, or the patience. Andrew called it patience. That's the most important thing. It doesn't matter which machine you use. It doesn't matter what color it is. It doesn't matter which seed, but you have to switch over in your mind. You need a new mindset in order for this to work, because there's also a proverb: iron creates more work for iron, but if I leave out the iron, then I have to replace the iron with a root. Because as Andrew said, you don't stop tilling and only do more sowing, but no, that is the wrong approach. You have to think about it. You are anyway still a lot on the field, but you observe. That's the main thing, that you have to observe, and you have to want to do no tillage farming, because that's what ultimately brings you success. Yes, then there's a question concerning the humus development. Do you see any difference? Do you see that there's more humus than in the past? Well, I've done that for 4 years, and humus layer development takes a long time, so I can't say a lot about it anymore, but I did new samples 4 years ago, and I have an analysis 20 years ago, and well, my dad started to switch over to cover crop, and since then, in that period, we have been able to increase the humus by 1.6%. Yeah, but it's a small period. Yes, as Andrew said, the soil gets darker. You notice that there's more carbon, and the resilience, if there's strong rain, if there's an extreme weather, then you can also notice that the soil has more buffer in it. Then there was a question by Lasse Altmann: which ripening time do you prefer for grain maize to then drill winter maize? To sow it in, I think that's what's meant. Well, for us, our altitude is between 360 and 420 meters. Generally, ripening. Well, we are with the earlier varieties, 250 to 300 is the ripening figure, and you have to be happy if you thresh below 30% humidity. I mean, we try to finish with the areas by 15th of October so that we can put out a cover crop on time, or wheat, or put in wheat.
Danke.
Okay, thank you.
Letzte Frage an dich,
One last question to you before I ask questions to Andrew. This question is actually to the two of you, why it comes from Justas. Johannes, did you ever consider putting animals on the farm to graze the cover crops? Did you ever consider that?
Daran gedacht habe ich schon oft.
Well, yes, I thought of it several times, but the problem is how to do it. I mean, I work in the office part-time, so livestock farming is difficult. If you want to do that outside, then it's even more time intensive. And basically, a big problem is that we don't have coherent areas, you know, like they're spread out. And it would be too much of a logistic effort to get the animals from A to B to C. And water is also often the problem. How do I get the water to these fields? And basically the structure is not good. I would like to do it. I'm still thinking about it. What will come eventually is chicken. Andrew, you know it, or Norman, you know, like you have the mobile stables or hen houses, and they go then to different areas. Yes, thank you for this answer. And now a few questions to Andrew before I pass the floor back to you, Brendan. Andrew, first the question to you. Did you ever consider having animals in order to graze the cover crops?
The answer is yes, and I regularly consider it, and there are the big advantages to it. The animals return a certain amount of fertility to the ground. I probably still will need to do something to terminate the cover crop, but not necessarily always. There are a few impediments, time, infrastructure, as Johannes described. There are also some regulatory difficulties with doing it that can limit your scope, but it's not, I don't want to sound completely negative about it. It's just the right opportunity hasn't come up for me yet, but I hope that it will happen at some stage.
Vielen herzlichen Dank auch für
Yes,
die
thank you very much for this answer.
Und gleich noch eine
And
Frage an
another
dich,
question to
nämlich
you,
jetzt
Andrew,
bezogen
and
auf das
it
Thema Hecken.
relates to
Du
the
hast ja in deinem
subject of
Vortrag auch davon
hedges.
gesprochen,
You talked in
dass
your
du auch bei den
presentation,
Hecken deine Bewirtschaftung
well, you said
geändert hast,
that
also
you
dass
have
du sie eigentlich jetzt weniger schneidest.
changed
Und dazu gab es
hedge
eine Frage
management.
von
You
Jakob
trim them
Meyer,
back
nämlich er
less.
schreibt,
And Jakob
dass du
Meyer
erwähnt
has
hast,
this
dass
question to
deine
you.
Hecken
You
nicht mehr
mentioned
als 1
that
Meter nach
your
links und rechts
hedges
wachsen.
don't grow
Also ich
more than
hoffe,
1
das
meter
haben
to
wir
the
auch
left
so
and to the
richtig
right.
verstanden.
I hope that we
Woran
understood that
könnte das
correctly.
liegen?
Anyway, what could have caused that? Why don't they grow that much more outwards?
Yeah, thanks, Jakob. It's a very interesting thing, and it's not something that I expected. And I had the opportunity to try this because I put grass margins along the edges of the field, so beside the hedges, so I could afford to reduce the cutting because I wasn't trying to get machinery in as close. And I've seen this over most of the hedges, and the species mixes vary a bit from area to area. And my conclusion is that I'd normally use a flail cutter to cut back the hedge, and when I cut back the hedge, what I do is I allow in light to the more aggressive plants, which then dominate and come out. And particularly, I mean, it's particularly briars, blackberry plants, brambles, which will shoot out all over the place. But it seems a bit like some of the other things we described, that when the hedge is left alone, it reaches a much better balance itself between the plants, and so the more aggressive ones don't get those opportunities, and it settles down. So I I can't give a better explanation for it than that, but it's now, oh yeah, occasionally a briar will come out a bit further, but it's really quite rare. It's pretty much just a meter each way. Now they've grown up a bit, but again, not to great heights. It's just it's very, very interesting thing to watch year by year what's going on. And there are one or two areas where I don't have grass margins that this winter actually I'm thinking about doing a little bit of light trimming, but maybe what I'll do is put in a grass margin instead. I don't know, but that's what's been happening.
Okay, danke schön. Vielleicht gleich anschließend die Frage, ich stelle sie jetzt gleich.
Yes, thank you. And this is an English question. I'll ask it, and I hope it's okay. Anyway, it relates to these field edges with grass. So the question by Andreas is whether you don't fear that the grass migrates into the field and that these herbs that grow on the edges don't end up in the field eventually.
If I was completely organic, that might be more of an issue. But I think if I was completely organic, I would be doing some more cultivation, and that would probably sort that one. But the species that there's grass species that I've sown are mostly old grass species like cocksfoot and timothy they're maybe less aggressive than some of the newer ones, but they haven't, and some of those margins are 8 or 9 years there now, and they haven't spread out. But they do, what they do seem to do though, is they make it a little more difficult for other grass weeds, aggressive grass weeds like brome, which can be a big problem creeping out from the hedges if you're sowing right up to the hedge. That can be very difficult to do it, and to some extent the grass margin actually creates a buffer between that source of infection for your crops and the crops themselves. And those grasses are very aggressive, and they're one of the big challenges really in no-till cereal production, is because once grass weeds get in, you've got relatively little you can do about them except go back to inverting the soil. So the answer is no. They've probably been more of a benefit for grass weeds than a problem.
Okay, danke dir. Und vielleicht noch anschließend eine Frage von mir.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask a question, because you stressed it in your presentation and you pointed that out in particular, namely that at some point you created a balance between pests or weeds, as a pests and weeds, and their antagonists. So that nature creates a balance, that at some point you have a balance between nature and agriculture. So what's the degree of patience you really need to have as a farmer? Can you see a result already in the first year, or maybe do you have to wait for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years maybe to reach this balance, or would you not be able to tell? Can you put a time to it or not?
You can see some of it very quickly, and it's as I said earlier, it's a constantly evolving thing, and you don't win every single game that you play, but and weeds seem to have an evolution, that they'll come. There's a thing like willow herb appeared quite a bit in the early days of no-till, and I thought this was going to be a serious problem. And it's not it's a very difficult weed to control even with a herbicide, but it 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 just seemed to make its point and pretty much go away. There's still little bits of it, and once every 2 or 3 years it'll rear up. It'll appear in a crop to what looks like a difficult extent, and you think there's going to be seed forever there, but it just doesn't come. Weeds often have a function. They're thriving for a reason, and if you take a different point of view and think, why is that weed there? Is it there because it has a particularly aggressive taproot and it has an advantage over other things? And is that pointing me to a little bit of compaction here that I need to start thinking about? It's you can't always be as philosophical as this. So some things are a problem, but generally speaking, if you yeah, a less aggressive approach can be very quickly rewarding. Same thing, with the beetles. There were no beetles really until there were, or there weren't beetles weren't obvious to me, at least until there were some slug eggs there. And the slugs are really, really rare, very rarely any sort of a problem. But the beetles are there constantly. And I recently learned at a presentation at a base meeting that, the quantity of weed seeds that a beetle will eat in a day is absolutely phenomenal. Tens of thousands of seeds, which is terrific. So it's, we really, really don't understand these natural systems because they're so infinitely complex. And there's so much to be said for, gradually and gently withdrawing your interference from them and allowing things to just get on with themselves.
Danke, Andrew. Das ist sehr schön zum Ausdruck gekommen.
Thank you
Eigentlich
very
haben
much,
wir
Andrew.
und auch
And you
Johannes
made
auch,
that very
dass
clear in your presentation.
dass
And
man
also,
so
Johannes,
schon
you
auch manchmal
sent the same
zurückhält
message.
und auch
And so
schaut, was gut sein und
just
vielleicht auch nicht
take a
alles
step back
stehen
and
muss
watch
gleich.
your
Ja, das
land
finde ich
and
sehr, sehr
see what
schön.
happens, and that you don't
Ich habe
always
jetzt noch mal
have
geschaut
to
im
understand
Chat. Es gibt
everything
da noch
that
eine
you
Frage an
see right
dich,
away.
Johannes,
Johannes, there's another
nämlich die
question for you,
bewirtschaftest, ob du
namely
deinen
the
Betrieb
question
biologisch,
whether
ökologisch bewirtschaftest.
you
Das spielt auch
run
so ein bisschen
your
in diese
farm
Frage hinein, die
if
immer
you're an
kommt, wenn es um
organic farm.
Direktsaat geht,
This is a question that
nämlich,
always
wie ist
comes
denn
up
das
when
mit dem
it's about
Pflanzenschutz?
direct drilling, namely, what
Und
about
ja, also vielleicht magst du das beantworten, kurz und knapp. Und mich würde das
herbicides
nämlich auch interessieren.
and
Ihr habt es schon ein bisschen angesprochen, auch, dass es Möglichkeiten gibt, Pflanzenschutzmittel zu reduzieren, auch
you
bei der
said that it
Direktsaat
was
oder
possible for
also
you
No-Till.
to
Da würde
reduce
mich interessieren
the
eben, wo siehst du
amount
dann
or
noch
the
die
volume
größten Herausforderungen, dass man
of
da in Richtung eben
pesticides.
Organic
What would you
No-Till
say
kommt?
is the biggest challenge when it comes to reaching no-till, or organic no-till? Well, we are not certified, organically certified, but we use as little pesticides as possible. The insecticides and fungicides are no longer necessary on our farm because the plants, I don't know, maybe they are less susceptible to damage. I don't know, but the levels are really very low. And I read a book, or I can't remember whether maybe it was a presentation, and it was about this fighter mode as a farmer that you should leave behind, just to try out new things. And what we use is Winsun herbicides where we use the post-emergence. And no, sorry, we use less and less of them because we have a mark layer, and so it's always new material on top of older material, and there is less weed automatically. And on our farm, we mainly use glyphosate, but at very low quantities. When I look at conventional farmers, they use 4 times the quantity that I use. I don't use Roundup to kill weeds. I use it simply to make development easier. And I only use the spray or the substance to kill the cover crop. I don't want to fight the weeds. I just want to kill off the cover crop that doesn't freeze over so that I have a green in green system. So wait until it dies off and then
wächst durch diese gelbe Schicht aus abgetöteten Pflanzen schon wieder die neue Saat.
When the plants have been killed, the new ones are already growing through. So I use much less of the substance. And it is enough because the weed will die anyway because I use this harrow, and the effect is that I am able to reduce or avoid more toxic or more poisonous pesticides and materials. Agriculture, whether it's organic or conventional or traditional, it's always an intervention in nature. And I, as a farmer, can decide to what level I want to intervene. And based on the research project and based on my experience that I have made on my farm, the way I work, it causes the least damage because I protect the soil structure. So the beetles that Andrew mentioned and the wild bees, they all have their nests in the soil, and the spiders as well. And when I turn the soil over and over again, then these animals will never find a place to live. So everybody has to decide for themselves what they do. So in nature, the only tilling that is done is being done by wild boars when they search for feed. And thank you very much for this interesting answer. There are more questions in the chat, but unfortunately, we have already reached 10 o'clock. So we have to close this meeting. So Andreas, I see that you ask a question, but please contact the speakers directly, because we have reached the end of our kitchen table talk on this 10th of January. Thank you very much for the 2 speakers, Andrew and Johannes. Thank you very much for your inspiring, for your incredibly exciting and interesting presentations, also for answering all the questions. I would like to thank you all participants, for the proactive involvement, for your questions and discussions. And I would like to also thank our interpreters who made this meeting possible.
Und natürlich ein Riesendanke an dich, lieber Brandon.
And Brendan, a big thank you also for you. Thank you for being my co-moderator today. And may I ask you to say one brief final sentence, please?
Yes, add to the thanks. Also, I was talking to a farmer this weekend, and he was talking about conservation farming, and he was comparing it to a dance. He said, when a couple of people go onto a dance floor, it makes it so much easier for everybody else to join the dance. So I think we had 2 ambassadors tonight who, through their leadership and their innovation and their wonderful ability to communicate, have made it so much easier for other people to join the journey towards a more sustainable farming system. So thank you both very much, and thank you for everybody, especially you, Johanna, for organizing a very complicated multilingual event. Thank you, and thanks for our interpreters. Good night.
super. Nächsten Montag gibt es das nächste
Okay,
Online-Küchengespräch
Monday we
und
have
es
the
geht
next
unter dem
online kitchen
Titel
table talk, and it's
Wiederherstellung von
about
Grünlandlebensräumen.
restoring
Und ich möchte euch ganz herzlich alle
living
dazu
space. And
einladen, wieder
I'd
dabei
like
zu
to
sein.
invite you all
Wir werden
to
wiederum zwei
join us. We have two
Biodiversitätsbotschafterinnen, einer aus
biodiversity
Irland, nämlich
ambassadors, one
Michael
from
Keegan,
Ireland, Michael
und einer
Kagan,
aus Österreich,
and one
nämlich
from
Jakob
Austria,
Meyer,
Jakob
dabei sein
Meyer.
und
So
ihre
they will
Erfahrungen zu dem
present
Thema
their
vorstellen.
experience next
Den
Monday.
Teilnahmelinks können Sie
And
von heute
the
verwenden,
link is
gleiche,
the same as today.
beziehungsweise
So
alle
the
Infos
Zoom link is
dazu
the
auf
same. And you find all the information on
www.farmingfornature.at. Ich wünsche Ihnen
www.farmingfornature.at.
einen wunderschönen
I
Abend oder ich
wish
wünsche euch
you
einen
all a
wunderschönen Abend
very
und
nice
auf
evening.
Wiedersehen.
And
Bye.
I would like to say goodbye. Goodbye from Austria. Goodbye to everyone. Bye bye.